Once upon a time, in a small village in England, there lived a little girl named Emma. She was 8 years old and loved to learn new things. Emma especially loved learning English. Every night before bed, she would sit with her mum and listen to bedtime stories. But these were not just ordinary stories. They were special stories that helped Emma learn English. Emma's mum, Mrs. Smith, was a teacher. She knew that the best way to learn a language was by listening. So, she came up with the idea of bedtime English listening. Every night, Mrs. Smith would read a story in English to Emma. She made sure to speak slowly and clearly, so Emma could understand each word. One evening, as the sun was setting, Emma got ready for bed. She brushed her teeth, put on her pajamas, and climbed into bed. Her mum sat on the chair beside her with a book in her hand. The book was full of short, simple stories, just right for a little girl learning English. "Are you ready, Emma?" asked Mrs. Smith with a smile. "Yes, Mum," Emma replied, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She was excited, as always, for the night's story. Tonight's story was about a little cat named Whiskers. Whiskers was a curious cat who loved to explore the world around him. One day, Whiskers decided to visit the big forest at the edge of the village. As Mrs. Smith read the story, she paused at certain words to explain them to Emma. Whiskers was very curious. "Do you know what curious means, Emma?" Emma thought for a moment. "Does it mean Whiskers wants to know about things?" "Exactly," Mrs. Smith said. "When someone is curious, they want to learn or find out something new." Emma smiled. She liked learning new words. As the story continued, Whiskers met different animals in the forest. There was a friendly squirrel, a wise old owl, and a cheeky rabbit. Each animal spoke to Whiskers, and Mrs. Smith made sure to use different voices for each character. This made Emma laugh and kept her interested in the story. After the story ended, Mrs. Smith closed the book. "What did you learn from the story tonight, Emma?" she asked. "I learned that being curious is good," Emma said. "Whiskers had fun because he wanted to know more about the forest." "That's right," Mrs. Smith said. "And you also learned some new words, like curious and cheeky." Emma nodded happily. She always felt proud when she learned new words. Mrs. Smith kissed her on the forehead and said, "Good night, Emma. Sweet dreams." "Good night, Mum," Emma replied, closing her eyes. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about Whiskers and all the adventures he had in the forest. She dreamed of exploring the forest herself one day, just like Whiskers. The next day, Emma woke up feeling happy. She remembered the story from last night and couldn't wait to learn more. After breakfast, she went to school and told her friends about Whiskers the cat. They all loved the story too. At school, Emma's teacher, Mrs. Brown, gave the class a new activity. "Today, we are going to learn some new words in English," Mrs. Brown said. Emma was excited because she loved learning new words. The teacher wrote some words on the board: forest, explore, curious, and cheeky. These are the words we are going to talk about today, Mrs. Brown explained. Emma smiled because she already knew these words from her bedtime story. When the teacher asked the class if anyone knew the meaning of the word curious, Emma proudly raised her hand. "I know, Mrs. Brown," Emma said excitedly. Curious means wanting to learn or know more about something. That's right, Emma. Well done, Mrs. Brown said with a big smile. After school, Emma couldn't wait to get home. She knew that tonight her mum would read another bedtime story, and she wanted to learn even more new words. When she got home, she quickly finished her homework and helped her mum prepare dinner. Emma always liked helping in the kitchen because her mum would talk to her in English, teaching her new words as they cooked together. "Emma, can you pass me the onion, please?" her mum asked. "What's an onion?" Emma asked, curious. Her mum laughed softly and showed her a round, white vegetable. "This is an onion. We use it to make food tasty." Emma handed her the onion, repeating the word in her mind to remember it. Every time she learned a new word, she would say it several times to make sure she wouldn't forget. After dinner, it was time for Emma's favorite part of the day, bedtime English listening. Once again, Emma got ready for bed, putting on her pajamas and brushing her teeth. She climbed into bed and waited eagerly for her mum. Mrs. Smith entered the room with a new book in her hand. Tonight's story was called The Brave Little Squirrel. "Are you ready, Emma?" Mrs. Smith asked, sitting down next to her bed. "Yes, Mum. I can't wait," Emma said excitedly. The story began with a small squirrel named Sammy who was afraid of climbing tall trees. Sammy's friends, the birds and other squirrels, would always climb high up into the trees to collect nuts. But Sammy stayed on the ground. He was too scared to go up the tree. "Why was Sammy scared, Mum?" Emma asked, looking worried. "Well, sometimes people and animals are afraid of new things," Mrs. Smith explained. "But as we listen to the story, let's see what happens. Maybe Sammy will find a way to be brave." Emma listened carefully as her mum continued reading. In the story, one day, a strong wind came through the forest, and a baby bird fell out of its nest. Sammy knew he had to help the baby bird, but the nest was high up in the tree. Sammy was scared, but he wanted to help his friend. As Mrs. Smith read, she used different words to describe how Sammy felt. Sammy was nervous, but he knew he had to be brave. "What does nervous mean, Mum?" Emma asked. "Nervous means feeling a little scared or worried about something," her mum explained. "But being brave means doing something even when you're scared." Emma nodded, understanding the difference. She loved how her mum always explained words in a way that made them easy to remember. As the story went on, Sammy decided to be brave and climbed up the tall tree to return the baby bird to its nest. He was so proud of himself for overcoming his fear. At the end of the story, Mrs. Smith looked at Emma and asked, "What did you think of the story tonight?" "I loved it, Mum. I learned that even if you're nervous, you can still be brave," Emma said. "That's a wonderful lesson, Emma." "And you learned new words too, like nervous and brave," Mrs. Smith said. Emma smiled. She was happy that she could understand more and more English words every day. As she lay in bed, ready to sleep, she thought about Sammy the squirrel and how brave he had been. She wanted to be brave too, just like him. "Good night, Emma," Mrs. Smith said softly, turning off the light. "Good night, Mum," Emma whispered, already dreaming of more adventures with animals and new words.